On my engagement day, my mom texted, "We're busy, send pics." Then I opened Facebook, my entire family on a wine tour with my brother. Caption: Best day with the best people. I sent one text, "Cheers." That night, I pulled my name from the family trust, froze the mortgage payment account. 6 days later, my dad showed up red-faced. I opened the door and said, the morning of my engagement day was quiet, almost too quiet. I had expected a flood of calls and messages from my family, the same people who, for years, had made me promise they'd be part of my big moments. I'd grown up being told that family came first. Birthdays, graduations, promotions, if one of us had news, everyone showed up. That was the rule. Instead, by noon, I had just one text from my mom. "We're busy, send pics." That was it. No emojis, no. "So happy for you." Nothing about when they'd see me or if they were planning to stop by. Just a flat sentence that felt like it had been typed while she was distracted, maybe even while laughing at something else. I read it twice, almost waiting for another message to follow. Nothing came. I tried to push the thought aside. Maybe they were genuinely busy. Maybe my brother's kids were sick. Maybe my parents had some unavoidable errand. I told myself they wouldn't just miss something like this without a good reason. Claire, my fiancée, noticed I wasn't checking my phone as much as usual, but I told her everything was fine. Around 1 p.m., while we were in the middle of taking pictures with friends, I opened Facebook to post a quick photo. That's when the air seemed to drop a few degrees. The top of my feed was a post from my mom, an entire photo album. The cover photo was my parents, my brother Daniel, his wife, my cousin, and even a couple of my parents' close friends. They were standing in a sunny vineyard, each holding a glass of wine, laughing like they were celebrating something huge. The caption under the album read, "Best day with the best people." I clicked into the album. There were more than 30 photos. Wine tastings, big cheese boards, group selfies. Daniel had his arm around my mom in almost every shot. In one picture they were all toasting with champagne, midday. Not a single one of them had mentioned this to me. Not in the weeks before, not in the morning when I texted them about the engagement, not even in the last hour when my mom had messaged me. They had chosen this. They had chosen my brother's company over mine, on my engagement day. It was so deliberate that I almost laughed. The wine tour had clearly been planned in advance. You don't just spontaneously gather 8 people and drive out to wine country. Which meant that while I had been thinking my family would be showing up to celebrate me, they had already decided weeks ago where they'd really be. I replied to my mom's earlier text with one word, "Cheers." Claire glanced over at my phone but didn't say anything. She knows me too well. When I go quiet, it's not because I don't have anything to say, it's because I'm deciding how to say it. That night, after everyone left and Claire had fallen asleep, I sat in the dark with my laptop open. For years, I had been the one quietly keeping my family afloat. When I sold my business at 29, I'd set up a family trust. I covered my parents' mortgage, my brother's second car loan, my mom's credit card debt. I never asked for thanks, and I never lorded it over them. I thought that's what family did, help each other without keeping score. But the thing about not keeping score is that you don't notice when the game is one-sided. I logged into the trust account and removed myself as a trustee. Then I went into the payment accounts, froze the mortgage account, stopped the car loan payments. I didn't drain their personal savings. I'm not a thief. But I wasn't going to keep bankrolling people who could skip the most important day of my life to sip Pinot Noir with my brother. 6 days later, there was a loud knock at my door. I opened it to find my dad standing there, face flushed, jaw tight, breathing like he'd run up the stairs instead of using the elevator. I didn't move aside yet. I just looked at him and said, "Come in. We need to talk about how you really see me in this family." My dad didn't knock twice. One hard thud on the door, and he was inside as soon as I opened it, like I had no say in the matter. He didn't greet me, didn't look around, didn't even ask where Claire was. He just stood in the middle of the living room with his arms slightly out, like he was ready to demand something heavy. The first thing out of his mouth wasn't a question about my engagement. It was about the mortgage. Said the bank had called. Said 2 payments had bounced. He wanted to know if I'd messed up something with the accounts. A messed up payment. That was the scenario in his head. Not that I had made a decision, but that I had accidentally tripped over the wires of the perfect little financial safety net I'd been maintaining for them for years. I told him there was no mistake. I'd stopped paying. He frowned like I just said something in another language. Then he asked why. I explained exactly why. That my engagement day was important to me, that I'd expected them there, that I'd found them instead on Facebook with my brother drinking wine like they were celebrating the birth of royalty. I told him that if they could put that much energy into showing up for Daniel, they could have at least done the same for me. He waved it off. Said things come up. Said they'd planned the wine tour for weeks and it wasn't worth canceling over one afternoon. Then he added the phrase that made my teeth clench. I was taking things too personally. I asked him if he would have been fine if I'd skipped his wedding to go hang out with friends. No answer. Just a twitch in his jaw. Then came the line that locked everything into place. Your mom didn't mean anything by it. It wasn't an apology. It was an excuse. And it made one thing clear. They didn't believe they'd done anything wrong. In their eyes, I was the bank. I was the provider. And banks aren't supposed to have feelings. So I told him point blank. The trust was dissolved, the mortgage account was frozen, the car payments for Daniel were over, and any emergency loans to cousins or extended family were done. If they wanted to live as if I didn't exist, they could pay for that privilege. He said I was being selfish. I laughed, not loud, but enough for him to hear, and told him I'd been paying their mortgage for 6 years without once holding it over their heads. If that was selfish, maybe they should try it sometime. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even close the door behind him. The next morning, Daniel texted me. Not to congratulate me. Not to ask how the engagement went. His first message in months was, my car got repossessed. Fix this. No. Please. No explanation, just an order. I told him maybe he should have saved some of the money he'd been spending on weekend trips and overpriced wine. He replied with a string of insults. I didn't bother responding. That night, I sat down with a pen and paper. I wrote every name in the family who'd ever borrowed money from me, had me cover their bills, or somehow found their way into my accounts. Next to each name, I wrote exactly what I'd done for them, how much, how often, and for how long. The list was longer than I expected. It was like seeing the bones of a house you'd been living in without realizing it was rotting from the inside. Daniel was first. My parents would follow. Then the cousins. Then the family friends, who'd somehow convinced me they were worth helping. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was going to let every safety net unravel, one strand at a time. They had ignored me on the most important day of my life. Soon, they'd know exactly what it felt like to be ignored. And I wasn't going to stop until they did. 2 days after his car got repossessed, Daniel called me. I watched his name light up my phone screen and let it ring out. No voicemail at first, just another call. Then another. By the 4th try, he left a message. He started off in that forced, measured tone people use when they're trying not to sound angry. He said he knew something must have happened, and that we could work this out. But by the end of the minute-long voicemail, his voice was raised, accusing me of playing games and trying to make some point at everyone's expense. I didn't call back. Instead, I pulled out the folder in my desk drawer labeled Daniel, Financial. I'd kept it for years without even thinking about it. Old car loan statements. Insurance policy paperwork. Credit card bills I'd once quietly paid off for him after he forgot to make the payments. It was all there in neat order, a record of every time I'd stepped in to save him from his own decisions. 3 years earlier, when he'd fallen between jobs, I'd taken over his car loan. Not out of obligation, but because without the car he couldn't get to work and the whole family would have to hear about how unfair life was for the next decade. I'd even paid his car insurance every month because he didn't want to downgrade to a cheaper plan. It stopped that night. All of it. By the end of the week, Daniel had no car, no insurance, and a credit card that was overdue for the first time in years. I didn't answer his calls, didn't respond to his texts. I just watched. The family group chat started to light up with my name in bold. My cousin Mark said he'd heard I was cutting everyone off. My aunt chimed in saying, he's making it personal. My mom typed a short, clipped, we need to talk, which I ignored. My dad stayed silent. That Friday, Claire and I went out to dinner at a little place by the water. I didn't check my phone until we got home, but when I did, there were 11 missed calls from Daniel. The texts told their own story. The first few were polite, then came the begging, then the blaming. His last one said, "If I lose my job over this, it's on you." The following week, it happened. His company had been looking the other way on his attendance issues for months because he had reliable transportation for client visits. Without the car, they reassigned his accounts, and by Wednesday, Daniel was unemployed. There was no satisfaction in it for me, just confirmation. For years, I'd been propping him up, thinking I was helping. All I'd really done was let him believe he couldn't fail. The second I stepped back, gravity took over. The real twist came when his wife, Hannah, called me. We'd never been close. She'd always been polite but distant, as if she wasn't sure how to treat the brother-in-law who quietly paid for half of her lifestyle. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She said she just found out they were 3 months behind on rent. Daniel had been telling her I was still covering everything, and she only learned the truth when the landlord showed up with an eviction notice. I told her she needed to take that up with her husband. She asked if I'd at least give them a small loan to get by. I said no. By the end of the month, they'd packed their things and moved into my parents' house. That was exactly what I wanted. Because when they all lived under the same roof, taking them apart financially, and otherwise, would be a lot more efficient. And my parents were next. When Daniel and Hannah moved in with my parents, it felt less like a family reunion and more like someone dropping a lit match into a pile of dry leaves. My parents framed it as helping family during hard times. I knew the truth. Daniel wasn't going to lift them up. He was going to pull them down with him. The tension started almost immediately. Hannah lasted 3 days before complaining to my mom that she wasn't used to sharing a kitchen. My mom told her that in this house, everyone helped with groceries. That didn't go over well. Daniel didn't fare much better. One evening, my dad asked him to mow the lawn, and Daniel actually asked if he'd be paid for it. I stayed out of it. I didn't need to stir the pot. The pot was boiling on its own. Instead, I turned my attention to something bigger. For years, I had been quietly covering the mortgage on their house. They'd refinanced twice, once to pay for my mom's medical bills, another time for a dream trip they never took. I never asked where the money went. I just kept paying. Now, with the account frozen, late fees were stacking up. Foreclosure wasn't close yet, but the numbers were already turning ugly. I decided to dig deeper. I called the bank and requested the account history. Since I was the co-signer on the original loan, they couldn't refuse me. That's when I found 2 large withdrawals labeled as home improvement, one for $18,000, another for $12,000. No permits had been filed for any construction, which meant the money went somewhere else entirely. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I printed everything, slid it into a folder, and labeled it leverage. The unexpected twist came sooner than I planned. A woman from the county property office called me, saying they'd received a complaint about my parents running an unlicensed rental out of their basement. I thought she had the wrong person, until she mentioned Daniel's name. Turns out, without telling my parents, Daniel had listed the basement on a short-term rental site. He'd already hosted 2 weekend stays. My mom found out when a stranger with a rolling suitcase knocked on the door asking where to check in. The blow-up was immediate. My mom screamed at Daniel in the driveway while half the neighbors watched from their porches. Hannah slammed the guest room door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. My dad called me later, demanding I come over right now and sort this out. I told him I was no longer involved in their problems, and hung up. That night, I sat in my apartment and realized something. I didn't even have to attack yet. They were already unraveling. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to make sure they couldn't recover. Not financially. Not socially. Not as a family. And I already knew exactly how to do it. It was going to be public. It was going to be humiliating. And best of all, it was going to make them turn on each other so completely, they wouldn't even see me coming. I didn't rush it. The best kind of damage isn't done in the heat of the moment. It's done slowly, with precision, so the target never sees the blade until it's already in deep. I waited until a Saturday morning when I knew all 4 of them, my parents, Daniel, and Hannah, would be home. My parents always slept late on weekends, Daniel and Hannah even later. By the time they poured their first cups of coffee, my plan was already rolling. The homeowners association in my parents' neighborhood had a reputation for policing even the smallest infractions: lawn height, mailbox paint, the acceptable shade of Christmas lights. These were people who thrived on rules and gossip, which made them the perfect weapon. 2 days earlier, I'd mailed the HOA president a packet. Inside was a copy of the county's complaint about the unlicensed rental Daniel had been running in their basement, complete with screenshots of the short-term rental listing. I made sure to include the reviews from guests who mentioned easy check-in and host was friendly. I didn't send it anonymously. My name was at the bottom in bold ink. HOA meetings were open to residents. I showed up early and sat in the back corner, just far enough that I wasn't in their direct line of sight. When the president reached the new business section, she unfolded my packet and started reading. By the time she got to the part about strangers coming and going at all hours, a few neighbors were already muttering. Then she read the guest comments aloud, and someone in the front row actually laughed. That's when I handed her the second set of documents, the mortgage statements showing those 2 large home improvement withdrawals my parents had taken out, with no permits on record for any work. The president didn't say the word fraud, but she didn't have to. The way people turned to look at each other made it clear where their minds went. The meeting ended quietly, but the damage didn't take long to show. By Monday morning, the neighborhood Facebook group was buzzing. One post read, "Is it true the last name family is running a hotel out of their basement?" Another asked, "Anyone know what happened to that renovation money?" The next time I drove past their place, the curtains were drawn. No cars in the driveway. A few lawn chairs were tipped over in the yard like no one had bothered to pick them up. That night Daniel called. His voice was sharp, but there was a strain under it, panic trying to hide under anger. He accused me of humiliating the family, said people in the neighborhood were treating them differently now. I told him maybe he finally understood what it felt like to be excluded and talked about behind your back. He tried to shout over me, but I hung up before he could finish. I figured they'd try to ride it out. Keep their heads down until people moved on to some other piece of gossip. I was wrong. The next morning, I got an alert from the bank. The mortgage account I'd co-signed years ago had a pending update. When I checked, I saw the note, property listed for sale. They weren't downsizing. They weren't relocating for a fresh start. They were fleeing. And the best part? I already knew the exact place they were moving to. I'd known for weeks. Because the address was in a city where I had even more leverage than I did here. They thought they were running away from me. They were running right into the last part of my plan. I knew where they were moving before the for sale sign even went in the yard. Word traveled fast in our family, especially when it wasn't supposed to. My mom's cousin Lisa called me out of nowhere, speaking in that syrupy tone she uses when she wants to sound compassionate, but can't hide the glee in her voice. She said my parents were starting fresh, in a smaller house in another city, far from all the drama. She thought it would sting me. Instead, I almost laughed. They'd picked a place where I had more influence than they realized. Years back, after selling my business, I'd invested in a small but profitable property management company in that city. I eventually sold my shares, but the relationships remained. Realtors, landlords, inspectors, I'd done business with them all. And in real estate, reputation is currency. One phone call was all it took. I didn't tell anyone to block my parents outright. That would have been sloppy. I just sent over copies of the HOA meeting minutes, the county rental complaint with Daniel's name attached, and the mortgage statements showing those home improvement withdrawals with no permits. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. The first house they bid on was, mysteriously, pulled from the market after their offer. The second? Accepted another bid at the last minute. By the third time it happened, they were frustrated and confused. I stayed quiet. Daniel's life was unraveling in parallel. Without a job, car, or steady income, he started leaning on Hannah's family. I knew it wouldn't last. Her parents had always kept him at arm's length. By late autumn, Hannah had packed her things, taken the kids, and moved in with her sister. She filed for separation 2 weeks later. That left Daniel alone in my parents' crumbling support system. He bounced between a couple of friends' couches before ending up in a dingy basement apartment in a part of town where even the police didn't like to drive at night. My parents, backed into a corner, settled for a small rental on the edge of town. The landlord? A friend of mine from years ago, someone who owed me a personal favor. I didn't ask for special treatment. I just made sure he knew that rent was to be collected on the first, no extensions, no exceptions. Within 3 months, they were struggling to keep up. My mom had taken a cashier job at a discount store. My dad was doing odd jobs for neighbors, fixing fences, hauling junk, patching drywall. Every now and then, Lisa would call me to update me, but really, it was to see if I'd soften. I never did. By December, the family group chat was silent. No holiday plans, no greetings, no obligatory photos of decorated trees. It was like we didn't exist to each other anymore. On New Year's Eve, Claire and I sat on the balcony of our new condo, champagne in hand, looking out over the city lights. My phone buzzed once, a text from my mom. "I hope you're happy." I looked at it for a long moment before setting the phone down without replying. Because the truth was, I wasn't happy in the way she meant it. This wasn't about joy. It was about balance. They had shown me, with perfect clarity, where I stood in their lives, and I had simply mirrored that back to them. Now there was nothing left to fix. Nothing left to fight about. Just silence. And peace. For weeks after New Year's, nothing. No calls. No texts. No updates from Lisa. I thought maybe they'd finally settled into their new reality, and accepted that the lifeline was gone. Claire and I were making plans for a trip when the surprise landed in my lap. It started with an email from my old banker, the same one who'd helped me freeze the mortgage account months earlier. He said my name had popped up in a file review. Not because I was in trouble, but because my parents had tried to use my old co-signer status on their mortgage to apply for a personal loan, without telling me. The application was sloppy. They claimed I was in agreement and would provide collateral for them. They even forged my digital signature on the form. That alone could have been enough to sink them if I'd reported it. I didn't call them. Instead, I called the bank's fraud department and confirmed in writing that I had not, and would not, consent to any loan. Then I sent a short, polite email to my parents. "I know about the loan application. Withdraw it." 3 days later, I got an unexpected text from Hannah, Daniel's soon-to-be ex. She said she'd heard from a mutual friend that Daniel was telling people I'd ruined his life out of jealousy. The funny part? That mutual friend was someone I'd helped get Daniel a job years ago, and they knew the truth. They told Hannah about every bill, every loan, every quiet bailout I'd ever given him. She was stunned. But the real twist came when she told me something I hadn't known. Daniel was back in my parents' rental. Not living there, hiding there. Apparently, he'd gotten himself into trouble with a payday loan company, missed payments, and now people were coming by his apartment looking for him. So he'd run straight back to them. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just taken away their money. I'd left them with the one thing they couldn't afford anymore, Daniel. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered my engagement day, the wine glasses, the Facebook caption. And the feeling passed. Now, the only question was whether to leave them to implode on their own, or give them one last push.